Trial by combat, wise judges dispensing fair verdicts, and heroic knights defending the innocent. Medieval justice in movies looks noble, dramatic, and surprisingly fair. The reality was a nightmare system where your social class determined your fate before you ever entered a courtroom. Forget Hollywood's romanticized legal proceedings with thoughtful deliberation and careful evidence. Real medieval justice was brutal, superstitious, and designed to reinforce power structures rather than seek truth. Once you understand how medieval courts actually worked, every period drama becomes laughably unrealistic. Justice wasn't blind. It was bought, sold, and twisted to serve the powerful while crushing the weak. Hollywood shows medieval trials as dramatic courtroom scenes with evidence and testimony, but the real system was far more terrifying. Medieval justice wasn't about proving innocence through facts, it was about surviving supernatural tests designed to let God reveal the truth through torture. Trial by hot iron was probably the most common ordeal. Accused persons had to carry a red-hot iron bar for several paces, then have their hands bandaged for 3 days. If the wounds healed cleanly, God had declared them innocent. If the wounds festered or became infected, which they almost always did, guilt was proven and punishment followed immediately. The process was rigged from the start since proper wound care didn't exist. Trial by boiling water worked similarly. Suspects had to retrieve objects from pots of boiling water, then wait for divine judgment through wound healing. The water temperature, object depth, and healing time were all manipulated by court officials who already knew the desired outcome. Rich defendants could afford bribes to ensure cooler water or better medical attention during the waiting period. Trial by combat sounds dramatic until you realize it was basically legalized murder with a religious excuse. Defendants could fight their accusers directly or hire champions to fight for them. This immediately favored the wealthy who could afford professional fighters, while poor defendants faced trained killers with farming tools. The logic was simple: God would ensure the righteous party won, regardless of fighting skill or equipment advantages. Church officials running these ordeals understood human psychology perfectly. The rituals, ceremonies, and religious language created an atmosphere of divine authority that discouraged resistance. Most people genuinely believed God would intervene to protect the innocent, making them more likely to confess rather than face seemingly impossible supernatural tests that would expose their guilt anyway. Medieval justice wasn't just unfair, it was openly designed to protect nobility while crushing peasants. The same crime carried completely different punishments depending on who committed it and who the victim was. Your social status literally determined whether you lived or died. Killing a noble as a peasant meant automatic execution, usually by hanging, drawing, and quartering. But nobles who killed peasants often paid simple fines or received brief imprisonments in comfortable castle quarters. The legal system explicitly valued noble blood over common blood, with written laws stating that aristocratic lives were worth hundreds of peasant lives in monetary terms. Clergy enjoyed special protection called benefit of clergy that basically made them immune to secular justice. Priests, monks, and anyone who could read Latin could claim church sanctuary and face only internal ecclesiastical courts that rarely imposed serious punishments. This created a two-tiered system where educated religious figures could literally get away with murder, while illiterate peasants died for stealing bread. Wealthy merchants could buy their way out of almost any punishment through fines, donations, or political connections. Medieval courts openly accepted bribes as standard operating procedure rather than corruption. Judges expected payment for favorable verdicts, and everyone understood that justice was a commodity to be purchased like any other service. The most perverse aspect was blood money systems, where crimes against nobles required massive financial compensation, while crimes against peasants cost almost nothing. Rape, assault, or murder of common people carried token fines, but insulting a knight's honor could bankrupt entire families. The message was clear: aristocratic dignity mattered more than peasant lives, and the legal system existed to enforce social hierarchy rather than protect citizens or seek truth through fair proceedings. Medieval punishments weren't designed for rehabilitation or deterrence, they were public entertainment that reinforced social order through spectacular displays of state power. Every execution, flogging, or mutilation was carefully choreographed theatre meant to terrify audiences into submission. Public executions drew crowds like modern sporting events. Entire families would travel miles to watch criminals die, bringing food and making festivals out of human suffering. The condemned were paraded through streets in carts while crowds threw garbage, shouted insults, and celebrated their approaching deaths. Children learned social norms by watching neighbors torn apart by horses or slowly strangled on gallows. Mutilation punishments were specifically designed to mark criminals permanently while allowing them to return to society as living warnings. Thieves lost hands, liars had tongues cut out, and adulterers were branded on their faces. These weren't just punishments, they were advertising campaigns that turned human bodies into walking reminders of what happened to rule breakers. The pillory and stocks weren't just physical restraint, they were public humiliation designed to destroy social standing permanently. Victims were locked in place while communities threw rotten food, human waste, and rocks at them for hours or days. The psychological torture of complete helplessness while former neighbors abused them often caused mental breakdowns that lasted long after physical wounds healed. Torture wasn't just about extracting confessions, it was about demonstrating absolute state power over human bodies. Authorities wanted everyone to understand that resistance was futile and that challenging the system would result in unimaginable agony. Public torture sessions served as both punishment and political theatre, with elaborate ceremonies designed to maximize terror and reinforce the complete powerlessness of ordinary people against institutional authority wielded by nobles, church officials, and royal representatives. Medieval courts weren't corrupted by bribery. Bribery was literally how they were designed to function. Justice wasn't a public service seeking truth, it was a private business where judges, clerks, and officials expected payment for every decision, document, and verdict. Judges openly advertised their prices for different outcomes. A favorable verdict in a property dispute might cost several months' wages, while escaping a death sentence required liquidating entire family fortunes. Court records from the period show detailed fee schedules for legal services, making it clear that purchasing justice was standard practice rather than hidden corruption. Legal documents required bribes at every step of the process. Clerks demanded payment to write petitions, file papers, or schedule hearings. Court officials expected tips for favorable seating, expedited trials, or access to judges. Even bailiffs charged fees for basic services like delivering summons or arresting suspects. The poor literally couldn't afford to pursue justice through official channels. Witnesses could be purchased as easily as any other commodity. Professional testimony was a thriving business where people made livings by swearing to whatever version of events paid best. Character witnesses, expert testimony, and even victim statements were routinely bought and sold. Courts made no effort to verify witness credibility since everyone understood the system ran on money rather than truth. The most sophisticated corruption involved political connections rather than direct bribes. Noble families traded favors, arranged marriages, and formed alliances that guaranteed favorable treatment in legal disputes. Powerful lords could pressure judges through threats, promises of advancement, or social ostracism. This created a shadow justice system where political influence mattered more than evidence, testimony, or legal precedent in determining outcomes. Modern audiences expect medieval courts to at least attempt investigating crimes through evidence and logic. But medieval justice relied almost entirely on superstition, social prejudice, and magical thinking instead of anything resembling actual detective work. Physical evidence was largely ignored because medieval people believed spiritual forces revealed truth more reliably than material clues. Crime scenes weren't preserved or examined, witnesses weren't systematically questioned, and alibis were considered irrelevant if supernatural tests indicated guilt. Judges trusted divine intervention through ordeals more than human observation or logical reasoning. Confession was considered the ultimate proof regardless of how it was obtained. Torture was explicitly legal and widely used because extracted confessions were viewed as divinely inspired truth rather than desperate lies told under extreme duress. The more elaborate and detailed the confession, the more convincing it seemed to medieval courts who didn't understand psychological effects of prolonged torture. Character assassination replaced actual investigation in most cases. Prosecutors focused on proving defendants were têtards, the type of person who would commit crimes rather than demonstrating they actually committed specific acts. Previous sins, moral failings, or social associations became evidence of current guilt. Unpopular individuals, religious minorities, or social outcasts were automatically suspect, regardless of actual involvement in alleged crimes. Supernatural evidence was completely acceptable in medieval courts. Dreams, visions, prophetic pronouncements, and divine signs were treated as legitimate testimony. Dead bodies supposedly bled in the presence of their killers, blessed objects revealed hidden truths, and holy relics exposed lies through miraculous interventions. Judges incorporated astrology, folk magic, and religious superstition into legal decisions without any awareness that they were abandoning rational investigation methods entirely. Medieval justice wasn't a flawed attempt at fairness. It was organized oppression disguised as divine will. The wealthy bought verdicts, the poor faced rigged supernatural tests, and everyone understood that birth determined fate more than evidence. Your modern courthouse would seem like fantasy to people living under legalized brutality.